Hey again everybody, this is part 2, which I have called Users, Groups and Computers. The reason I've done that is because basically that's exactly what it's going to be this time. We're going to talk about how to bring in users and groups and computers into the domain. So you can see this is the server installation, which we have promoted to a domain controller in the previous tutorial if you've been watching. If I go into the server manager, you can see it's part of the domain contoso.com, which is exactly what we wanted. Now if I move over to another computer, it's an XP installation, you'll be able to hopefully, this is a brand new installation, just imagine this is another computer on the network that we want to bring in as part of the domain so that we can manage it centrally. Now basically, if you are implementing this in real life, then this following message doesn't apply. But if you're learning like me and you're using software such as Oracle VM VirtualBox, you will need to make sure that whichever virtual machine you're running does have a setting under network as bridge adapter. It's usually network address translation. That will not work in this case, or it hasn't for me. I just changed it to bridge adapter, and that means everything's able to communicate with each other. To make sure all of your servers, all of your systems that you're using to make up this are set to bridge adapter. Okay, so all I'm going to do now is move this XP installation into as part of the domain. But before I do this, I'm just going to show you something a little bit important. If I go back over to the server, if I click on Start, All Programs, Administrative Tools, and go to Active Directory, Users and Computers, which will only show up after it's been promoted to a domain as far as my knowledge goes. If you click on that, and if you go into, this is how it should look initially, you'll have your domain listed along the top. Press the plus icon on the tree and go to Computers. You'll probably see at the moment that is blank because no computers have been added into this domain. So as we head back over to our XP installation, the best way to add this to a domain controller or to the domain of contoso.com on our server is we need to click Start, we need to go to My Computer, we need to right click on it, and we need to go to Properties, and then click on Computer Name tab, and where it says to rename this computer or join a domain, press Change. So we press Change. It's currently in the work group called Work Group, that's always by default. Change it to Domain, and you just need to enter the domain. Now it can be a little bit strange. Sometimes you have to put the full domain. In our case it's contoso.com. Sometimes that will work, which it hasn't, and hopefully this is just because sometimes you don't have to put the .com or the .net. Sometimes you just have to put the first part of the domain. So if we press OK this time, there you go. It's asking for a username and a password. This has to be an administrative account on the server, which we set up previously in the previous tutorial. So the username by default is administrator, and whatever password you assigned when you promoted the server to a domain. Press OK, and it will try to communicate with the server now with that username and password we have provided. You can see it's loading currently. You don't want to upset this while it's doing its stuff by moving things around or trying to close it or pressing OK. You just sort of have to leave it and let it load. It's a similar process on Windows 7 as well. You just press Start, right click on Computer, I think, go to Properties again, and it's pretty much the same process from there. And again, you just sort of got to let it do its stuff and wait for it to finish. So there you go, welcome to the Contoso domain, which is exactly what we want to see. You press OK, you must restart the computer for changes to take effect. So press OK and press yes to restart. So we'll come back to this once the computer's restarted. Okay, so when you turn your computer back on, or when the computer restarts itself, you will see a different login screen to the usual Windows login screen, which usually just has a little picture of your username, a little picture in your username. In this case, because it's part of a domain now, because it's different the way it works, it will ask you to press Ctrl-Alt-Delete to log on. So if we do that, it will ask you for the username you can either log in locally, which is what it's currently set to do. If you press the options tab, you can log in locally with the local username and password that you have on the computer, or you can log on to the domain, which is Contoso. So you need to change that to Contoso, and then you need to enter a username and a password that is currently available on that domain. Now in our case, I'm just going to log in with my account, which is administrator, which is the same username and password that we used to create the domain initially. So that should let me log on. There you go, loading your personal settings. Now, in order for this to work, the server now must always be turned on in order for you to log into the domain, because when you log on, it takes the settings and the policies and the permissions and authenticates your username and password with the server when you're logging on. Also, before I went to the server and I checked that if there were any computers listed, and there wasn't. And if we refresh this now, you can see the computer we've just added to the domain is now listed. So that's how you add a computer to a domain. I'm just going to also make a little point. If you are experiencing very, very tediously, incredibly slow logins to your to log onto the domain, like I did when I just logged into the XP system, it literally took me 5 or 10 minutes, which is why I stopped the video just then. It is probably because you need to reconfigure some of your IP address settings on the client as well. Now, if DNS was set up correctly, which it would be in a real environment, you probably wouldn't need to go ahead and do all this. But because we're just doing this for test purposes, you can either just sort of go with the very slow logons, or you can run a little process which I'm just going to show you now to make the logins a lot faster. And by doing this, you go to Control Panel. This has to be on any computer that you're adding to the domain, like the XP one we've just added. You're going to need to go to Network and Internet Connections, Network Connections, Local Area Connection, Properties, Internet Protocol, IPv4 in some cases. And again, just like with the server in the previous tutorial, we need to assign it a static IP. Well, no, actually, you can leave those details the same. You just need to assign a DNS server. And the DNS server has to be the domain controller, which we previously assigned a static IP address. If you're unsure what this is or can't remember, you can go back to the server. You can click on the little server manager at the bottom, go to the system summary, and you can see the server's IP address 192.168.0.11. So all we do is type that in here, 192.168.0.11. The reason we don't have to assign a static IP address for this client is because you don't really need to know what its IP address is all the time, because there's not really any content on it that needs to be accessed by anybody else, because it's just an end client computer. That's what this is supposed to be. If it was, like I said, a server or a printer, yes, you would want to assign a static IP address so you know what it is on the network all the time. But in this case, we don't want to do that, so just assign your preferred DNS server if you want to make the logins faster. Press OK, press OK again, press close, and then you can attempt to log off and log back on, and touch wood, hopefully the logins will be a little bit faster. So if I go in as administrator and put my password in, if I can spell it, there you go, that was very, very, very quick. So that's exactly what you want it to be like. When that's in a real environment and you've got people logging off and on and using resources on the server all the time, it's probably not going to be that fast. You're probably still looking at, you know, sort of 20 seconds, 30 seconds, and the worst case, probably 1 minute, 2 minutes, depending on how big your profile is. So that's pretty much how you add a computer to a domain. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about how to add users and groups. Now, the reason we have groups, I mean, a user makes sense. You'd add a user so that they're able to log on. Now, you can assign the permissions that you want an individual user to have if you wanted to. But for example, if you were in a school or a college environment, where you've got lots of students and you want them all to have the same permissions, you would assign all of the students to a group called students, for example, and then you would then put all of the permissions into the group itself, so that anybody in that group would get the permissions based on the group. So you could have a students group, you could have a staff group, and you could assign different permissions for each group, and then just put all the staff into the staff group, all the students into the student group. So it means you don't have to assign permissions over and over and over again for every student or every staff member. You can just add them into their own group, and then you have to do it once or twice, which makes things a lot easier and a lot quicker. So to start with this, you need to go into your domain controller server. You need to go into all programs, administrative tools, Active Directory users and computers, and where it says contoso.com, we'll add a group first. There is no unit called groups. You've got users, you've got computers, everything's in there. So to add a new group, you can just right click within all of the folders, new organizational unit, and then just call it groups and press OK. And you can see it pops it down at the bottom. And now we're going to right click on that, click new, click group, and I'm just going to pretend this is a college environment, so I'm just going to call it student or students. You can leave everything else as it is for the time being, because that's all just a little bit more advanced. Press OK and you can see there is now a students group. There's a few settings for this group in particular. You can set up an email address for the group, you can do all sorts of weird and wonderful things. You can add them to members of other groups, so a member can be a group within a group, if that makes sense. Now I'm going to add a user. So I'm going to go into the users folder, I'm going to right click, I'm going to press new, and I'm going to press user, and then that'll ask you some details. So I'm going to put student 1 and what can the last name be? Last name. That's really not very creative of me, but there you go. The login name can just be student 1. That's what they need to. That's what they log onto the network using, and that's how we identify them. You can add an initial if you wish. You can press next. It'll ask you to give them a password. And then you can choose certain options here as well. The user must change their password at next logon. That means the first time they log in, they will be asked. A pop-up will show, and they will be asked to change their password. User cannot change their password. I'm just going to tick that one to show you that it does work, and it won't allow the user to change the password. Password never expires. You can tick that again if you don't want it to expire. Under the policy settings, which I'll show you soon, you can change how long it is before a password expires. So depending on how secure you want your system to be, you can have it, for example, every 30 days, every 60 days, every 90 days, never, and every however often the user will get a pop-up saying you need to change your password. You can also disable the account at this point if you wanted to. You press next. I'm so bad with passwords, I can never get them right. Really? Okay, so third time lucky. And then you'll just get a little summary of what you've just done. Press finish, and you can see the student is now listed within the users directory. If you double click on that student now, you get a lot more options. You can obviously add telephone numbers, email addresses, web pages, all sorts of general information. You can add addresses. You can check over their account and their settings. You can have a look through this yourself and just see what you're able to do. It's more advanced most of the time. The profile path I'm going to go into later, because that's to do with roaming users again, which is something I'm going to go into. If you go into member of, you can assign this user to the group, and the group will be called students. You can see now it's a member of students. So any permission that's applied to the students should hopefully follow off to this user. So from here you can just press OK. So we've successfully added a group and a user, and just to show you that that works, I'm hopefully going to go back to my XP installation and try and log on using student 1, I think it was, and the password. And you can see that has let me on successfully. Yay! Because it's the first logon, it will come up personalizing settings and set everything up for this particular user. And once we are on, I will also just try to change my password, which you will see will not work because it won't let me, because I disabled the option when I made this user. Okay, so now it's come on, it's logged on, student 1 last name, which is what I called the student. And if I just press Control Alt Delete and press change password, if I try to change my password, you do not have permission to change your password, so you can see that has worked exactly as it should have done. So that's just showing you how to create users and groups. So in the final part of this tutorial, I will take you through roaming user profiles, so you can log on one computer and get access to your files on another computer if you log on a different computer. And I'll also take you through a few basic policies and permissions that you can set up, and a few cool little things that you can just do just to make logging on just a little bit easier. So yeah, come back to see part 3. You can visit me online, www.davidashcroft.co.uk. Find me on Twitter at davidashcroftco, or Facebook, facebook.com/davidashcroftco.uk. Or if you like what you see on my channel, if you'd like to subscribe, that would be excellent. Thank you.